In 1967, a young woman stepped off a Greyhound bus in Nashville with only $20 and a stack of songs no one wanted. Executives laughed at her high-pitched voice, mocked her big blonde hair, and told her she'd never have a future in country music. But that woman would go on to build an empire worth over $650 million, write more than 3,000 songs, and become one of the most beloved figures in American history. She would rise from a cabin with no electricity in the Smoky Mountains and conquer the world, transforming rejection into resilience. She would give the world Jolene, I Will Always Love You, and 9 to 5. Yet behind the rhinestones, wigs, and iconic smile lies a story of devastating losses, battles fought in the shadows, and scars no amount of fame could heal. This is the story of how she became a global icon and what it cost her. Born into poverty, a childhood of hunger and shame, Dolly Parton was born on January 19, 1946, in a one-room cabin in Locust Ridge, Tennessee, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains. She was the fourth of 12 children in a family where poverty wasn't just a condition, it was a way of life. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, worked as a sharecropper and construction laborer, his hands calloused and bleeding from long days in the tobacco fields. Her mother, A.V. Lee Parton, sang to her children even when there was no food on the table, filling their empty stomachs with melodies instead of meals. The cabin had no electricity, no running water, and no insulation against brutal winters. 12 children slept in cramped beds, wrapped in patched quilts. Ice formed inside the windows, and the children woke shivering, breath visible in the frigid air. This poverty was not just physical, it was humiliating. The pain of being different in school Dolly's childhood was marked not only by hunger, but by the cruel social stigma of being poor. At school, she was the girl everyone whispered about, the one in homemade dresses stitched from rags, shoes so worn her toes poked through. She stood in line watching other girls in store-bought dresses and felt shame rise in her chest like a fire. Classmates mocked her relentlessly, calling her trash and excluding her from everything. Teachers offered little comfort, and the message was clear: she didn't belong. The humiliation of poverty carved a wound deep into her young heart, one that would follow her even after she became famous. Yet despite this, she found refuge in music. It became her currency, her comfort, and her escape. The first spark, a voice. Too big for the mountains. Music was the Parton family's greatest resource. Her mother sang old Appalachian ballads while cooking over a wood stove, and her grandfather, a Pentecostal preacher, filled Sunday services with fervent gospel hymns. By age 7, Dolly was writing songs, scratching lyrics onto scraps of paper with broken pencils. By 10, she was performing on local radio stations in Knoxville. At 13, she made her debut on the Grand Ole Opry stage in a homemade dress, trembling but determined. Even as applause echoed around her, poverty still held her family in its grip. Nights were often just cornbread and beans, and her father sat at the table, crushed by the weight of mouths he couldn't feed. Yet Dolly vowed she would escape. She loved her family deeply, but she knew that staying meant drowning in the same life she'd been born into. The move to Nashville, a dream, meets brutal reality. The day after graduating high school in 1964, Dolly left the mountains. With a cardboard suitcase, a guitar, and $20, she boarded a Greyhound bus bound for Nashville. She believed her talent would speak for itself, but Nashville was a city built on dreams that often died quietly. The industry devoured hopefuls, and Dolly soon learned she was not immune. She moved into a cramped, roach-infested apartment and survived on stolen ketchup packets, crackers, and whatever free food she could find. Hunger followed her like a shadow, echoing the childhood she'd tried to escape. She knocked on every door: record labels, publishing houses, radio stations, only to be rejected again and again. Executives dismissed her voice as too high, her accent too mountain, her look too loud. "You're too country for country music," they said. Their words echoed the childhood humiliation she'd thought she'd left behind. First Success, First Chains, Monument Records, and Dumb Blonde in 1966. A small glimmer of hope arrived when Monument Records offered Dolly a contract. It wasn't a dream deal. It was restrictive, low-paying, and took creative control away from her. But it was a door, and Dolly kicked it open. Her first single, Dumb Blonde, was released in 1967 and climbed to number 24 on the country charts. For the first time, people heard her name. But success came with a price. Monument wanted to make her more pop and less country, stripping away her identity. She recorded songs she didn't believe in and smiled through photo shoots that made her feel like a product. Worst of all, the money didn't follow. Her contract was exploitative, designed to enrich the label while keeping her struggling. She was selling records but still scraping by, haunted by the fear that her dream could vanish at any moment. The breakthrough and the trap, Porter Wagoner's offer. Just as despair threatened to swallow her, fate intervened. Porter Wagoner, a country star known for his flashy rhinestone suits and syndicated TV show, offered Dolly a co-host spot on his show. It was the break she'd prayed for, a steady paycheck, national exposure, and a platform she'd never had. But the opportunity came with strings that would soon feel like chains. Porter managed her career, controlled her recording sessions, and had final say over her songs. Dolly was grateful and naive enough to trust him, but trust proved dangerous. Porter wanted her to be his sidekick, his pretty blonde co-star who smiled, sang, and never stepped out of line. He treated her like property, not an artist. When she pushed back, he tightened his control. Their relationship became a battleground, and Dolly felt herself slowly disappearing. The song that saved her, "I Will Always Love You." Dolly endured years of creative suffocation, but she never stopped writing. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she poured her pain into songs Porter would never hear. One of those songs was "I Will Always Love You," written as a goodbye to the partnership that had saved and trapped her. After 7 years of tension and compromise, she finally found the courage to leave in 1974. She walked into Porter's office, guitar in hand, and sang the song she'd written. Porter listened in silence, tears in his eyes. He didn't want to let her go, but he couldn't deny the power of her words. He agreed to release her, but not without a cost. Dolly had to pay a settlement she could barely afford, borrowing and sacrificing to buy back her own career. Freedom had never been free. Rebirth and triumph, the rise of a superstar. Once free, Dolly didn't just survive, she exploded into superstardom. She released "I Will Always Love You" as a single in 1974, and it soared to number 1 on the country charts. The world heard not just a breakup song, but a woman reclaiming her voice. Throughout the late 1970s, she released a string of iconic songs that defined her legacy. Jolene in 1973, a haunting ballad that showcased her storytelling genius. Here You Come Again in 1977, a crossover pop hit proving she could dominate beyond country music. And 9 to 5 in 1980, an anthem of working-class America. The song became a movement, written for the film of the same name, in which she starred alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. It topped both country and pop charts and earned her an Academy Award nomination. Building an empire, Dollywood and the power of ownership. By the early 1980s, Dolly's empire continued expanding. She launched her own production company, taking control of her music, image, and business. She became one of the first female country artists to own her masters, a decision that would later earn her hundreds of millions. But her most audacious dream was still ahead. In 1986, she opened Dollywood, a theme park in the Smoky Mountains near her childhood home. Critics scoffed, calling it a vanity project. But Dolly understood something they didn't. People didn't just want a theme park. They wanted her story. They wanted to walk where she'd walked and feel the magic of the mountains. Dollywood became a phenomenon, attracting millions of visitors annually and becoming a major employer in the region. It was her way of giving back to the people who had shaped her. The price of fame, loneliness, exhaustion, and private battles. Even as the world celebrated her, Dolly struggled behind the glitter. Triumph was fragile, fame was fleeting. The relentless pace of recording, touring, and promoting took a brutal toll. She was everywhere. Television, radio, magazine covers, concert stages. But the cost was her health, privacy, and peace of mind. She admitted she was running herself into the ground, terrified that if she stopped, everything would disappear. The pressure suffocated her, and the ghosts of her past followed her everywhere. The poverty of her childhood, the years of rejection, the battle with Porter, these wounds didn't vanish with success. They remained hidden beneath rhinestones and laughter, shaping her every decision. Love in the shadows, marriage, distance, and the cost of ambition. At the center of Dolly's private life was a paradox few understood. She was one of the most famous women in the world, and yet one of the loneliest. In 1966, she married Carl Thomas Dean, a quiet man she met in Nashville. Carl shunned the spotlight, preferring anonymity and a simple life. He ran an asphalt paving business and rarely appeared publicly with her. In over 5 decades of marriage, he has been photographed with her only a handful of times. To outsiders, it seemed like a marriage in name only. But Dolly defended it fiercely, calling him her rock. Yet the price of her career was absence. She spent years on the road, and their marriage survived on phone calls and brief reunions. The emotional cost of her ambition was immense, and the loneliness remained. The legacy of a woman who refused to quit. Dolly Parton's story is not just a tale of success. It's a story of survival, of turning pain into power and rejection into resilience. She was a barefoot girl from a one-room cabin who walked into Nashville with nothing but a dream and refused to be crushed by an industry built on crushing dreams. She fought for her voice, reclaimed her freedom, and built an empire on her own terms. But she also carried scars no amount of fame could heal, reminding us that success doesn't erase suffering, it only changes its shape. In the end, her greatest legacy may not be the songs, the fortune, or the theme park. It may be the proof that even the deepest wounds can become the foundation of something extraordinary.